turn it over to CEC's Executive Director, Chad Rummel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chad. I'm the Executive Director of CEC, and I'm pleased to welcome so many of you here today. To see so many of our practitioners participating and adding one more tool to your toolbox. The special education community is constantly being asked to be adaptive in everything you do, and this last week and the weeks leading up to today have taken that adaptation and stretched it farther than any of us have ever experienced. And for your ability to keep adapting and working to serve our students, I want to thank you. The steps ahead of us are very uncharted in many ways, but we must do it together if we want to see a return to normalcy or to our new normal. Whatever that looks like, CEC will be poised to lead you as we enter that stage as well. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the CEC webinar, Teaching Special Education Online During COVID-19. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Kelly Grillo and Jeremy Glauser. Jeremy is the founder of eLuma, the leading provider of teletherapy for K-12 schools and districts. And Kelly is an award-winning educator, an expert provider of online instruction, and CEC's 2020 Teacher of the Year. Based on the many questions being shared in our all-member forum in the last few weeks, we asked Kelly and Jeremy to come together to provide us with strategies to help you take your teaching online. And they spent countless hours over the last 3 days putting together today's presentation. So I'll now turn it over to Kelly and Jeremy to get us started.
Hello, everyone. We're happy to be here. So we're going to start off with just a little overview of teaching online during COVID. Jeremy is going to take us through the first two portions of our slide deck today. All of the materials that we talk about will be provided to you before the end of the webinar. And we'll continue to push these things out through our networks. We truly appreciate everybody's collaboration. We also appreciate all the teachers that took countless time contributing today's material. We have done a lot via distance tools. At this time, some of these tools have been slightly imperfect because of the mad demand that we're putting on some of these systems. So as we learn together, we ask for everybody to please be patient and know that you all are feeling the same stress that we have felt over the last 3 days. And so the biggest message is that A, you're not alone, and we're in this together.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started here, and we will jump in and talk about many great things. Thank you so much, Dr. Grillo. It's been a pleasure to work with you and so many experts who are trying their hardest and who are all working to provide best practices in this very difficult time and as we're facing this unprecedented coronavirus and school closures. So these are some of the learning objectives that we will want to cover today. So by the end of the webinar, we hope that you will be able to identify the necessary tools and strategies for online instruction. We hope that you will be able to adapt traditional and classroom lessons to meaningful online instruction, develop a strategy to monitor learning goals, and the last one here, create a process to effectively manage online instruction. So as Dr. Grillo said, I'll be going through those first two parts. Let's jump to part one. Let's get ready. You know, schools are clamoring for solutions, and we're all striving to figure out how to move our students online over the past week. And we have evaluated every angle from services to tech support to every different strategy that we can come up with to do online instruction. Many schools have mitigation plans to help them go online. Our position is that the last thing admins and their teachers need right now is to sign a contract, retool 100%, and implement a whole new technology stack district-wide. We believe educators need to focus on what they're familiar with and get up and running with what they have during these short-term closures. Be patient with yourself. Everyone's in the same boat. So let's go ahead and jump into these different pieces of getting set up. The first thing that we want to talk about is technology. There are some key resources that you'll need to have to ensure great success. The first is a working laptop and a webcam. If you have an iPad or a tablet, do as best you can with what you have. A headset is really good. It helps with high quality audio and communication when you're working online through a video conferencing platform. And then you'll want to make sure you've got a high-speed internet connection. Now, be patient with yourself. This might take some getting used to and adapting to, but these are the key resources that you will need when you're getting set up with technology for the first time. The other piece that you'll need is access to a HIPAA-compliant video conferencing software. Zoom is an incredibly dependable solution and is offering a free basic account for K-12 educators. This is amazing. So in our resources on the follow-up, you'll want to go fill out the form and then get free access to that. So we'll make sure you've got the link and the information to do so. The next thing that you want to take account for here is your workspace. Now, your workspace is going to look different for everyone. When we're going home and we've got our spouse or our partner working from home, we might be trying to figure out creative spaces to work. You might have your kids with you. You might be like my wife and myself and our 3 kids, where they're working from home. Do your best. Try and find a quiet space if possible. Lighting is best when it's coming from a window or a natural source towards your face. And make sure to try and eliminate unnecessary distractions behind you. If you have an appropriately sized desk and chair, you'll really be thankful because you'll probably be sitting more than you're used to. And you'll want to make sure that you're comfortable that way. And for many educators working online, you'll want to make sure that if you have a second computer monitor to plug into your laptop or your computer, it makes it easy to have multiple things up at once, as well as a keyboard and a mouse. Those things make navigating and collaborating easier and is better on your body. Now, the last thing I really want to focus on with the setup is your own self-care, right? Let's be good to ourselves. We're all going through this for the first time. Well, many of you are, and others at home these kids are going through it for the first time. So dress professionally. Make sure you create a schedule so that you can stick to something that gives you dependability and routine. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. It is cold when you're sitting down a lot. Your blood might not flow as well as if you're up and moving in a physical building. So blanket or warm socks are definitely a plus. Get up every so often. Move your body, get the blood flowing. There's a really good 20-20-20 rule. Look 20 feet away every 20 minutes for 20 seconds. Your eyes are probably not quite as used to looking at a computer that close to your face that much during the day. And of course, part of our good self-care is patience. Like I said, and like Dr. Grillo said, we've got a lot of kids who are doing this for the first time, parents who are both at home now. There are going to be an array of difficult situations. And just know everyone's in this situation. If your child pops in behind the camera, introduce them. I had that happen to me just the other day. Just pray that your kids are fully dressed, unlike my kids at that moment. But you know what? We're all trying our very best. We're all trying to get kids educated and help our students progress. The next thing that we want to take a look at in getting ready is our communication planning. And this is really critical for us as part of self-care, but also just as part of educators. I'm going to show you a sample routine for AM and PM schedules because it is very different. It might be obvious to many of us that we have to create a different routine if we're working from home, but still the nuances can be challenging and we need to set our own selves up for success. So let's take a look at Mr. Smith, who's a first grade special education teacher, and his sample daily routine. In the AM, Mr. Smith is I'm going to get up, I'm going to exercise, do my mindfulness activities, take a shower, I'm going to eat, drink my coffee, hydrate myself, and then newsflash, I've got a real world moment here. I've got to wrangle my own kids and get them going. And that's okay. Review of schedule, announcements, and objectives for the day, and then get that out to our families. You'll probably get into a cadence where you make phone calls to families, where you'll have video calls, where you'll exchange emails and even message through your favorite app like Edmodo or Class Dojo, or maybe many of you use Remind. And getting into this rhythm of checking in each day might be realistic if you have a smaller caseload, but if you have a larger caseload, be realistic with yourself. It might be every few days or at least weekly. And then make personal connections. It's very different when you're working online and you're not physically in the building. Those personal connections are going to be more intentional. So we recommend video office hours, or making sure that you have video meetings with your colleagues, and that you're collaborating regularly through phone, video, and other modes of making personal connections. Now at midday, I've got to check in. I'm doing my lunch bunch. I'm getting up, I'm walking around, I'm getting outside for a few minutes, I'm hydrating myself, and then another real moment pops in. I've got to keep my own kiddos entertained. I've got to focus on their learning as well. And then I'll check and connect with my families, my students. I post some success stories, some pictures, maybe even a recording of myself, and post it out to my families and connect with them. And of course, I want to remember to do my AM formative assessments and logins and metric data so I can get that documented while it's on my mind. One of the things that we often don't realize when we go online is that documentation, even though it's critical when we educate in person, it becomes more critical when we're working remote, so that we can go back and remind ourselves about these interactions and keep track of student progress. So in the PM, I'm going to look at and write out my parent notes on the message board. And then another real world moment. Now, if you're like me, I love my kids dearly, but we're going to be working at home and we might not be used to that. And our kids, as much as we love them, we might need to lock them in their room sometime. Now, I'm just joking. Please don't really do that. But you get my point. Focus on homework and study, skills planner checks, message your colleagues, and collaborate on video or Zoom calls. Now, it might sound silly, but have a coffee talk over video on Zoom, or do a check-in, collaborate. You do still need to have that adult time. You still do need to make sure and reach out and collaborate with your colleagues and your administrators and your staff. So make sure at the end of all that, you're doing some of those formative assessments, you're logging your data, and you're keeping track of what you're doing. Now, let's move on to the third part of this first section and talk about how to get ourselves and our students online for the first time. Now that we've got our technology, our software, our workspace, and we have a communication plan and routine in place, we want to focus on getting ourselves and students online. So communication with our students while working with them from a distance is critical. Don't underestimate the need to over-communicate by phone or email. And so if we look at these 5 tips, I want to focus in on what it means for you to get your students online. So create a schedule for both you and your students, and so that you and your students and your families can see. That's an important component so that people know what to anticipate, and you'll rely on that. You'll send out reminders, and in those reminders, make sure to include a Zoom link. Make sure to include some instructions that I'll review here on this next slide. Prepare your materials ahead of time if you can, but again, do your very best. It might take some time as you learn this new modality. And when you're online, looking for materials can be distracting or can disengage the students that you're with, which is why eventually, as you become more adept to this modality, you'll want to have preparation ahead of time and be ready to rock and roll. Document thoroughly and make sure that you are logging all those notes and that data during or after the session, whatever your preference is, and then send some of the follow-up activities, reminders, and upcoming events. You might feel like you're sending a lot of those messages out to the families, right? But in reality, it's really about over-communicating. When you're moving online, it might feel like you're over-communicating, but I promise you, you'll need to do that. Otherwise, things will and may get lost in the shuffle. So on this next slide, I want to talk about what your students need to know. And this is a good resource for you because you can literally copy and paste this into a calendar invite. If you're using an existing tool or you're using a new tool, you can copy and paste some of these instructions into the calendar invite. Kelly, if you could go to the next slide, I want to show a few of the resources here that you've got. So they need to have, the family needs to have the same kind of quiet space, again, if as practical as possible, a working computer, a high-speed internet connection, a webcam, and a headset. And then in your invite or in your instructions, include your link to Zoom, and they click on it, and it will automatically open up that application. Be patient with your families. They may need to do it on their phone if they don't have a great internet connection. We have families of all different socioeconomic statuses, rural versus urban, access to technology and not. I have seen a lot of schools who are checking out Chromebooks and are offering other creative solutions like that. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is provide the best services that we can to these kids and help their education continue without regression. And so that last piece, you might need to understand how to allow their microphone or help them allow their microphone and audio and camera in Zoom for the first time. So these are a few really technical tips that you can copy and paste. You're welcome to reuse and repurpose yourself. Now, I want to move on to the second part of this webinar. And after the second part, I'll hand it off to our friend, Dr. Kelly Grillo. And there are some really good teaching strategies that you can apply to online instruction. I will go through 8 really solid teaching strategies that you can adapt for online delivery. So let's get set. The first one is to engage with your students. Engaging students online is different from engaging your students with your physical presence in a classroom. Now, if you're like my daughter many years ago and are engaged by some snow stuck on a glass window, it's pretty obvious to know that she's engaged. She's participating. You can see her body reactions and you can see her body language. So I encourage you to use your expressiveness. Be enthusiastic with your body language, with your tone of voice. Some of those intangibles don't come through quite as clearly as if you were physically in the same classroom. It's important to have your materials prepared beforehand, and it's important to have grace and patience for you and for your students. We're all experiencing these school closures for the first time as a result of novel coronavirus. So establishing your presence will signal to your students that you're visible, that you're available, and you'll be welcoming them to a new online learning environment. Remember, they might be nervous too. So that enthusiasm and tone of voice can ease their stress. Now, the second teaching strategy is setting clear expectations, and this is very much tied into your own setup, your routine, how you communicate through email, phone, video conferencing, messaging boards. And if you're like this teacher, you might be surprised if the expectations are not clear. This child obviously interpreted writing the largest number you can, not as the largest digit in infinity, but taking the number 1 and making it really tall. You know, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to see the humor in some of this, but then reset expectations, redirect, and help your students self-assess. The third strategy that we want to go over today is creating a supportive online learning environment and getting personal. So many of you use this Remind or Edmodo or ClassDojo application for communicating. If you don't, it is just fine. Our purpose here is not to tell you exactly how to run an online session or class. It's to give you strategies that you can implement with existing tools you're already familiar with. So this is one example. In this case, a teacher by the name of Amy uses Flipgrid to post a video and connect with her families. That creates a supportive environment. It creates visibility to you as a teacher or a therapist, and it develops that really good relationship that you need to have a responsive educational experience for these kiddos. The fourth strategy that we want to go over here is fostering personal relationships and remember to have fun. As I was preparing for this webinar the past couple of days, I reached out to our team who serves many kids around the country. And I said, you know what do you do, or what is an experience you've had that fits this? And I was so inspired by Lacey. Lacey is an incredible speech and language pathologist, and this is her story. I'm going to read it to you here. The absolute most precious thing happened in my session this morning. I was finally able to get 2 of my students lined up together in a session. I have known that they would do well together because they are equally just so kind and have incredible attitudes. Both have autism, so the conversation needed some facilitation. During our chat, it comes out that these students live in the same town, 4 minutes from each other. I got to watch these 2 incredibly sweet teenagers exchange phone numbers and plan to meet up at the park eventually. This is so significant. As you conduct individual or group class and therapy sessions, you might have some really impactful experiences like this. And if you're like me, this is what makes it worth it. The fifth strategy is use a mix of tools readily available to you. Now, I've mentioned this a time or two, but this is a really important one for you because it does not require a lot of retooling. This is not the time to retool 100%. It's the time to do it incrementally. We encourage you as a best practice to make sure you look at what you've got and start from there. Don't stress out too much. Take a baseline and build from that. Kelly, if you can go to our next slide, I want to point out some of the resources that are free. And we are going to provide a full comprehensive list of free resources that you can take advantage of. So many companies have graciously offered their things for free. So TED-Ed has a lot of free materials, built out lesson plans. Scholastic has a lot of really great free materials. I personally am a fan of News to You. They've got a lot of really great free materials. And then you can also use things like Google Forms. Google has a wonderful set of tools. And this one in particular, Google Forms, allows you to gather insight before a session. So Kelly, if you can switch us to that next slide, I'll give you an example of a teacher who is using Google Forms to do check-ins. So in the morning or afternoon, Miss Venturino will go ahead and send this form to the students who will fill out the survey, and it gives Miss Venturino some great insight into that student. This can also be used as a way for student feedback, self-grading, self-assessing. The next strategy is breakout rooms. Zoom has a really great option to do breakout rooms. Your students can engage one-on-one to answer questions. They can engage in small groups to do research projects. And then you as an educator can close those breakout rooms and bring everyone back to the main video room. We'll have some more information in the follow-up handouts. In the next strategy, number 7, we want to focus on breaking learning into smaller chunks and patterns of activity. And being in an online setting, you have a little bit more flexibility just because we're able to reach students where they are. And there are so many different philosophies on pedagogy. This is not the end-all be-all. You might have things that you believe in more strongly, personally, but prepare, teach, apply, and reflect. And if you can chunk these out into smaller pieces, that can help you as an educator transition online, take smaller chunks and prepare in between those teaching opportunities. And then the last strategy is to make sure that we're soliciting strong feedback. So in feedback, of course, if we don't have the feedback from the teacher to student or from student to teacher, then we're not able to prepare, reflect, prepare, and instruct personalized learning to that student. So make sure that you take those opportunities with Google Forms or other means to solicit their self-grading, their self-assessing, in addition to you providing reinforcement of positive behaviors and redirection. Again, these are some strategies that hopefully will help you get up and running. It's not, much of it's probably not new to you, but it will help you to realize that you are in a very good spot, there are just some things that you need to do in order to transition online. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Grillo.
Thank you, Jeremy. So part 3 of this webinar is going to take a look at when we actually go. We're going to go get started with getting ourselves online, and we're going to take a look at some very useful and practical examples. When we were preparing for the webinar, the 6,000 plus folks that signed up shared that they wanted out of the box and tried and true solutions that would bring them a lot of success without a whole lot of stress and, quite frankly, a lot of tears. So we're going to take a look at what tools might exist that model best practices so that A, we're not spending a lot of our time fumbling through the tools, and we're really spending the most or the majority of our time making those deep connections that Jeremy shared so that we can truly support our students. So this is what the cycle of online high impact instruction looks like. So if you think of any quality lesson plan, we've always started with like that backwards design, writing the learning outcomes and also making sure that those learning outcomes are aligning to the things in which we're looking to assess. So when we do that, we then can pick a selection of opportunities for our students to have experiences, whether these things are low tech or high tech, or a selection of things that they get to choose because they know they're learning best. But then we sequence those opportunities in a way that's meaningful, and we write very clear instructions. And so when I say very clear, we want to make sure that we're looking over those instructions and they are clear and direct sentences, that they do not go on and on and on and on. Maybe that we're using sequencing things like get ready, get set, go, like we are modeling in the webinar today, and that those sequencing opportunities kind of fit the same patterns so that our students who really do have executive functioning needs or they have organizational needs in their IEP, that they are able to wrap their minds around the sequencing of how online instruction is going to look week to week, as this might be something that we're doing for the remainder of the school year. At the very end of this, when we write those clear instructions, we want to think about those students that might have print needs or print disabilities. So a lot of our online tools have the ability for us to do a voiceover where we can record our own voices going over step by step those same instructions. I need for everybody to really think and reflect that we may have students that we teach that come from homes, much like my own home. My mother was illiterate, also a person with a learning disability, and she was a non-reader. So if we make the assumption that we have to use tools to help support our students because they might also be at home with parents who may not be accessing print, we will do a better job overall supporting our students. And there's tools that help us to do that pretty easily. This is just a quick glance of a real lesson plan because we want you guys to think of what are you already doing. So this lesson plan, and I provide this link in our resources, this lesson plan starts with my standards and what I need the kids to know, and I always target on spiraling standards. The remainder of this lesson plan has different tools that I've embedded that I had used with my students, let's say prior to extending online learning or at-home learning or distance learning. So I use things in my classroom like Quizlet to spiral and look at language options. I use things in my classroom like the Amoeba Sisters online. So I would continue to use those same tools because my students had fluency while we were together using those tools. We don't want to overwhelm our students or ourselves. So if you're using a selection of tools, you should continue to try to weave those tools in because our students are fluent using those tools. Here's an example. I mentioned the Amoeba Sisters. let's say I just did not have a platform to run my materials on, even though we use these materials in class. Let's say we were sort of low tech and I had a QR code that took students directly to this video in my classroom. And so if that was the case and we were doing centers and kids were rotating through live in my brick and mortar building, this is a nice way using TED Ed. You can create a free account. You can put your same, activation question in. You can link your same video, and it follows that procedural piece that I spoke of earlier, and Jeremy talked about setting up routines. So if you look at this, it says watch, think deeper, dig deeper, and discuss. So we can do these things and still allow our students access to the tools that we've been using in an organized fashion. And this could be my lesson for science each week. Now, a lot of you are saying, okay, Dr. Grillo, there's no internet. So I support cooperative school services. There's 9 districts, and our students range in ability level and also in kind of living in a metropolitan all the way to very rural. And so I even have the challenge of having some teachers without working high-speed internet. So if we're thinking of rural areas, we can send some of these same directions home with the same activation thinking strategies and a set of notes or guidelines so that kids are able to access with high tech or low tech. So this is another strategy I shared with my principals, and some of my teams are doing this. And so I have created a link directly to the same letter. And so for reading and exposure to literacy, we started this idea of a story a day while we're away. And so I mentioned some families are supporting kiddos. Why not have the whole family experience a story together? Whether it's via their iPhone or they're reading a paper book or they're using some means. I think what we need to be digging deeper into is this concept of having kiddos and their families taking a meaningful story and a break from the coronavirus to truly let their social and emotional well-being and stress kind of fade away and get into a book. I know some principals are going live and reading books. I know that some reading specialists and different teams and athletes and all sorts of folks are trying to make sure that literacy is truly accessible, because we do realize that some parents, again, are not readers, or maybe some kiddos are going to be spending time in other areas and childcare arrangements because their families are a part of healthcare worker teams. So we've got to be thinking pretty creative. But in terms of having students have some sort of access to a story a day, and we've given you some really cool things, but a personal favorite of mine is a story on Storyline called As Fast as Words Fly. And so it can teach us a lot about diversity and making sure that we're using technology to really work on the strengths of our kiddos. And the young man in that story becomes a beautiful typist. So I wish you'll go out and check that out as well. Now, when we're thinking about teaching, the best of the best in special ed focuses on this idea of flexible teaching. We, in our work, know this is universal design for learning. And so no two students are alike. So making sure that you have low tech and no tech options within your teaching routines is truly important. Offer choices, because we know that a lot of students have 100% extended time. If you're using strategies that allow for choices, you'll have students completing work because it's not so painful. So if we can give students choices, that's going to actually lead to work productivity, and we're going to be able to get them to accomplish things with less tears. Families are really concerned that kiddos are trying to do work and they're crying and emotionally going through stress. So we have to make sure those choices include fun items. I have a friend that's allowing their students to go onto Minecraft EDU for recess. So we've got to be building in those times for breaks for children, and not everything has to look like what it looks like when it's in your classroom. So just kind of keep that in mind. We've got to keep the choices fun and also keep them in a way that students will tackle them. We want to make sure that we're sharing content in multiple formats so that students can truly access the learning that you're trying. And if we need to coach our teachers that work with kiddos one-on-one a little bit too, we might need a little bit more general education and special education collaboration. And then think about the extra layer of having someone at home. So we might also need collaboration to increase from special education to parents to walk them through visual schedules, pieces that coach them and guide them through the different applications of our work, and truly allow students to create things and curate and share, because they're really missing school. You know, a lot of kiddos might say, oh, I hate school, but they're really missing their friends and they're missing the normalcy of every day. Here's a great example from a wonderful colleague that shared an entire book, and you'll have that book available off of Apple Books. It's a free download for you, but we can use this in both high-tech and low-tech options. And so whatever you're reading, if you do a story a day, you might have the student think through critically a main character, and they might think, oh, if this character had a theme song or like a rock song, what would their song sound like? And this is just a fun, creative way to address characterization, and it's predictable, and you can change the character throughout your days of learning, but keep the strategy the same. Now, if you know, it says you can write about it, you can speak about it, and then you can take video and upload it to the class. So if you have those multiple modes of engagement, it's going to increase work completion, and also the fact that if kiddos do not have access to the internet, they can still fill out this graphic organizer. This is a wonderful journal assignment that could stay consistent through our whole pandemic. This is from a university faculty, and there's more guiding questions, and you'll get a link to this activity, but he has students developing primary resources. So think about students and their feelings over having lived in a pandemic. They're having their lives changed immensely. So having prompts to write to and kind of journal writing, they might have a really easy time sharing, like they don't like staying in all day. They don't like not playing with their friends. You might get more writing because it's authentic and it's honest, and it allows them to be creative in a way that they can share their feelings. If you do assign this, I would recommend that you meet with your kiddos and you make sure they're not under distress. We work with a lot of kiddos that have, social and emotional needs. And although we want to give them creative ways to handle those needs, I suggest that you work with your related counseling service providers so that if you have a kiddo on the edge and they're overly stressed, that they can do a check-in and provide those service minutes. Now, my favorite and all-time great, I have been for years pushing special education teachers at all levels to really think about choice boards. So choice boards offer a lot of things to us as educators. They're easy tools to share out. Let me be real transparent about that. We can share choice boards really widely across many of our domains. With many teachers. So you're gonna really, if you develop a set of choice boards, I'm gonna challenge you as awesome stewards of your brother's keeper, sister's keeper, if you all could please share these with at least 3 colleagues, whether you think they're gonna use them as is or they might edit them, we're gonna divide and conquer our work, and it's not gonna feel so stressful. Choice boards also address our learners' needs because they have a choice. They're empowered to make some choices. So when you develop choice boards, we want to make sure that they're truly varied. And then we can also mitigate the technology concerns by offering low-tech options. So these tools can be posted for any learner on any management system. It could be sent out via a text message to a parent if you needed to. You could actually send these in the snail mail if you needed to. And I can't speak enough for choice boards. these are some real live examples. And so this is for a young man, Wiley, and then that QR code takes them to a technology-based board if available. If not, that's okay. So the teachers have created these very specifically for specific kiddos. This is one I use in a class at the University of Central Florida every year with graduate students that are first digging into universal design. So my students get the choice, and the choices are given vertically. They can do a traditional or low-tech option, or they can choose a student self-proposed option, or they can be a little risky and try a modernly high-tech option. So my students get a choice, and every single learning module is set up so it's 100% student driven, but I'm grading them the same. So when you give these choice boards, understand that you don't want to differentiate. If you think that something's more challenging, a student shouldn't get more points. If the deal is pick 3 things, they get 3 equal parts of that choice board grade. So here's a little graphic. When Jeremy and I were collaborating, thinking about what you all should be truly assessing is how, in fact, are you already using technology? And then if you're not, what technology is easy to monitor, easy to progress monitor, and easy to interact? So these are just a few, and I know Jeremy already touched on a few, and I showed you the example of TED Ed. There's a few on here that I've not yet spoken about. So I have my teachers in 2 districts exploring Read Theory. Read Theory allows you to assign reading, and students can access this on a phone. So they do 1 passage a day after they kind of Lexile set themselves, and you get immediate data based on them answering comprehension questions. So it'll ask them things right at their instructional level. What I allow my students to do is to use Read Theory and a screen reader so that they're able to progress to closer to on-grade level reading material. And so I'm challenging my teachers to allow students both reading with their eyes and reading with their ears. And so that's how I'm using Read Theory. Over time, if you assign at least 3 a week, it's been my experience that in roughly 1 year's time, students are at the independent level with reading if they're truly doing Read Theory 3 times a week. Now, that's not research, that's from practical standpoint. So, you know, me with the PhD, I don't want to say, oh, this is a guarantee. But what I am going to share is that if students are accessing Read Theory and they're truly engaging, you're going to see their reading totally skyrocket. I promise you that. Seesaw is a tool that my teachers are using, and I'm going to model it for you. So here's a picture of Seesaw, and I just registered myself a class. And what I love about Seesaw is there are activity libraries that already are addressing things for COVID-19. I'm going to demonstrate this one. So here is the daily reading routine. Notice each one of those numbered items. So when we talked about best practice, you'll have clear instructions that are numbered. These numbers have also a label that you're able to see some sort of action. At the bottom of this, it also has an ability to play back for students. And this is free for anybody to use. And you can borrow this lesson for creating your daily reading routine. If there's something you want to edit on it, once you say pull it into your class, you can go ahead and edit these things. Teachers are using this. It's very interactive. It's really easy to use. It's easy on an iPad or a computer. So because it's so fluid, students are able to log in on a phone. So it's a pretty easy thing for teachers to learn and also students to navigate. All right, this one's just pure old fun. So a lot of my art integration specialists or art therapists or your STEAM teachers, they're having kind of a challenge because they do a lot of creative materials. Maybe they do creative therapies, but they're having a challenge because there's not as many out-of-the-box solutions for them. So this is a great site. It's called Take Kids. There's activities that you can post as is, and they take you through a learning arc. You learn about art history, you learn about creativity things, and you can even make art. Now, the only stipulation I share is making sure you know your students that you're assigning this to. If a student is in poverty and they're needing to rely on our free and reduced lunch at this time, some of them might not be appropriate, but others of them will. So just make sure that you know your students and who you're customizing instruction for. But I do have a lot of therapists that are interested in using this tool. So let's take a look. How are we doing? How do we know when we're doing really well? This is the age-old question every teacher should ask, whether you're in a brick and mortar building, whether you're in a mixed mode situation, or you're trying to teach from a distance. How will I know when I'm doing well? Also, when is it time to truly adjust our practices? And then, what if I'm not feeling connected? So we know that a part of student success, the #1 thing that predicts that is the teacher. We know that relationships matter. In special education, especially when we do not connect with our students aren't progressing. So is that going to change? And if I have to find help, who in this time is going to help me? Because I'm isolated to my house. So we're going to talk about ways to get help. So here's a beautiful cat. And for all of you that know me, I love, love, love animals. I have far too many cats. But we know that engagement increases when you are personable, when you share a part of yourself, when you give your heart, and when you make it make a personal connection. So making a personal connection usually will get your students more deeply connected with you. The second thing to this is when we are doing really well in online or distance instruction, we're going to know because people are going to be engaged. We can take a look at various metrics: number of logins, number of text messages, number of parent phone calls, number of completed class assignments or submissions, number of discussion posts. Teaching online gives you sensitive data, but I like to take it to more realistic data. Are your kids responding to you? And are you having interactions that you feel like they are engaged? And I would take it as simple as, if you hear crickets, nothing from your kiddos for 3 or more days, you've got to engage them. So I kind of give you 3 because maybe they're working in 3-day cycles. And so wherever they are, they might need that 3 days. However, if you hear nothing from them in 3 days, I would give them a personal phone call. Now, many teachers shared with me today, they're not comfortable calling with their personal phones. So you can set up a Google Voice number, and there's plenty of tools, and I tweeted some out today with that, but make sure that you're checking in with your kiddos. When is it time for an adjustment? So just like in a building with brick and mortars, when you feel like your parents are telling you it's time, it's probably time. If you feel like the lessons are stagnant or you're just not getting them turned in, it's time for an adjustment. So typically our parents, our special education parents especially, they're going to speak up. What I'm going to ask for you to do is truly work with your parents. If we are communicating enough with parents from a distance, we're going to have an ability to kind of be flexible in time. So we don't have to wait until somebody's truly complaining, right? Or truly upset. I call it productively advocating. So we can use feedback and ask students even, how is this going? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Give me a 5 if you love this. Give me a 0 if you hated it. Give me a 3 if it's okay. And actually, if you guys are out there in cyberspace, feel free to give me a 5 if this webinar is going great. Give me a 0 if you hate it, or a 3 if you felt like you're right on par. It's average. Taking a look at 40 million, this is just a fun little fact. Within the world, I know special education teachers are truly special, and they want to be making those connections with our kiddos. So what I need you to know is just because you're not in a building, you'll be able to make the connection. There's 40 million Americans participating with online dating, and they say that they have found love via distance opportunities. If people can fall in love online and become married, I know that they can get passionate about your teaching. So a little fun fact, Daniel McNulty and I, we truly first engaged on a Twitter chat all about reading instruction and creating access. And he's currently now my husband. So if I can do it, I know that you all can do it. All right, so fun little fact. Staying connected. Let's think about how we're gonna get support and stay connected. So clearly a lot of you are my personal friends, connected to CEC, connected to eLuma therapy. So stay connected with us. Make sure you're not in isolation. Make sure you're co-planning with colleagues and teachers. I know that Jeremy shared that you should probably have a coffee date, coffee chat, have a web meeting with your colleagues to make sure that you're feeling connected to them. Also, involve your students in creating content because they're going to be able to really shape learning. And make sure that you're also staying plugged into what your districts are doing. I know amazing leaders. We have the Council for School Administrators of Special Education. They're working tirelessly with districts to make sure that you all feel supported. So make sure that you're staying up with your district leaders. And if you hit a snag, just stay calm, make sure that you're reaching out to folks. And also know there's a lot of us online. So if it's not working now, it's okay to step away for 20 minutes and come back and try again. I say that that's probably the best piece of advice. Don't get frustrated because you'll probably not solve it in that time. That's all I have for you guys. Hopefully you feel like you've learned a little bit. And I'm going to turn it over to the CEC leadership.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Jeremy. Wow, they say that's it. Like we didn't have tons and tons of resources shared. I'd like to remind everyone that the recording will be available. I've gotten that question a lot in the chat box, as well the resources, the slides, and a link to a handout. Those are available currently in the control panel, and they also will be available with the recording afterwards. We're getting close to the end of our time, but we do have time for a couple of questions. For those of you who have submitted questions we aren't able to get to, we encourage you to check with your colleagues, to chat with people if you're a CEC member in the CEC community, to reach out to us. As this COVID-19 progresses, we obviously are all learning as we go and learning what we might not know already. So knowing what we need to look for is really helpful. So here's one, can we legally provide IEP service minutes during online meetings? And that might be more of a compliance question, but do you guys know off the top of your head, either of you?
Yes, this is Jeremy, and then Dr. Grillo, I'm sure you'll have a lot to input here as well. But yes, providing online education does serve as a compliant form of delivering IEP related minutes. Just as a case in point, our organization serves 16,000 students across the country in many different states, doing speech therapy, occupational therapy, mental health counseling, school psychology, and assessment services. And maybe Dr. Grillo, you can talk a little bit more specifically to the teacher side.
Sorry, I'm having a little delay. Yeah, so within our service plans, we're sharing with teachers to make sure, like the resource that Jeremy shared with the Google Forms, that you're tracking your minutes. So if in the provisions of the IEP, it says that students get, let's say, 30 minutes of direct instruction for phonics, we've got to be making those minutes happen. So if school is AKA in session via e-learning, we've got to be tracking those. So whether we are sharing materials that parents help to facilitate, or we're physically getting on the phone and singing songs and doing things that would facilitate those phonics supports, if it says it in the IEP, we have to deliver it. So I do know I have teachers that have been meeting with small groups and also one-on-one with kiddos, and they have been using some tools to track minutes reading, like the read theory piece, or making sure that they're able to log in and track those minutes. So for every provision in the IEP, if it says X number of minutes in that service period, if we move to online, we have to track those minutes. OSEP also gave that directive so that we know if schools are in session, whether it's at a distance or if it's in the physical building, we are providing services. Those services might look a little different, but they have to be customized, specially designed instruction, and we have to be providing those instructional minutes. So yes.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point. We will include the OSEP directions, but also know that there's a lot of information coming out very quickly from state offices of education. The OSEP documentation is a great place to start. And I want to remind everyone that we will provide these resources out to you afterward. You won't be able to click on the screen here, but what we will do is provide the recording and a bunch of resources that will help you get up and running.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'll also tweet these out, and then maybe you all could push it on the eLuma site as well. We can send the link.
Right, we will for sure.
Great. So we have time for just one more question. We've gotten a lot of questions in about working with specific populations of students, those who have low incidence disabilities, those who may have visual impairment, folks in the preschool, pre-K world. We are going to, at this time, we obviously don't have enough time to address all of those questions right now. I'm going to suggest you reach out to our CEC special interest divisions. For those of you looking for information on especially health and multiple disabilities, our complex and chronic conditions special interest division just shared some information on their Facebook page about working with students at home. The CEC division for early childhood is an excellent place to go for resources, and as is the Early Childhood Personnel Center for those of you working with younger ones. And then both of the CEC division on visual impairment and deaf blindness, as well as the CEC division on communicative disabilities, I hope I got the new name right, are good places to go for folks working with students who have visual impairments or are deaf or hard of hearing. So here's the last one I'll pose to you guys for now. Working with students who may not have a lot of technology available. Kelly, you touched on this very briefly. Can you give us some more ideas for working with students who may not have access to internet all the time or to cell phones or things like that? What are some suggestions for keeping their learning going while they're not in a physical classroom?
Dr. Grillo, why don't you go ahead first and then I'll go after you.
Awesome. So what a lot of my teachers are doing is creating those menu boards, choice boards, and sending those home in paper format so that students can put those things up on the refrigerator and cross off the ones that they do, and then they're going to send back the package. So we are seeing some package kinds of things. And I know that online, a handful of folks really kind of slam that packet resource kind of approach. However, we've got to differentiate in a lot of ways. I'm really proud of my occupational therapist. They sent home visual schedules with packages of sensory routines and sensory diets. And then they did follow-up phone calls and kind of went through like all of the items in the bag. So I do think there's a way to, make sure that we're reaching folks without those pieces of technology. I know that on CEC Community, I shared the use of Zoom, and Jeremy also went over that in this, because Zoom allows you to make a phone call in versus just that video portion, that web call. So I think we've just got to be a little creative and think of what are we currently doing and how can that transcend to the home. And so if it's a specific need, if somebody wants to kind of DM me. I will kind of think through it. I'm a really good problem solver, but you probably have teams of folks too that are working through these same questions. That's why we try to address the no internet. But I think those choice boards, having the ability to make personal phone calls to families. I know that we can't gather physically. So what a lot of schools have done in the past with a regular e-learning day is they might actually meet groups of kids at the local public library, right? Or that's where the kiddos are getting support to do e-learning for their internet. So because we don't have that and those librarians there, we have a new challenge. So I do appreciate you all kind of grappling with the question, but I think if you think of the packages we can send home, clear visual schedules, because again, reading may be a barrier, and the minute we send paper, we're increasing the barrier to education. So we want to make sure there's visual supports. And then going over verbally on the phone, those visual schedules is going to make a win-win.
Yes, I agree with everything that you said. A few things that I would expound on is with regards to packets. If the family does have the ability to print them at home, great. If they do not, then many schools are abiding by the CDC's recommendations to not have gatherings greater than 10 by having a few people at the school who are printing packets for pickup, much like is being done for the free and reduced lunch situations and making sure that our students are getting fed. So having those packets printed and for pickup at the school is also an option. One thing for sure is that we do have to be creative, and I echo what Dr. Grillo has said there, because it is a tough situation that we're in and it takes all kinds. Continue the dialogue, keep talking to colleagues, and be creative, but remember that we are trying, everyone's in the same boat. We need to do everything we can to help these kids and provide the specialized instruction, all along reminding that we have to have grace for them and for us in the process.
On that note, and since we're at 5:07 East Coast time, I want to thank Jeremy and Kelly so much for their willingness to present this webinar for us, for their time, their expertise. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us live and for all of your commitment to children and youth with exceptionalities every day, and especially during this crazy time.